About a decade ago, well, actually more than a decade ago, I was 15 and I heard this question. It wasn't the first time people talked about it, but someone asked, why do you never hear people complain about the Chinese? You hear them complain about Moroccans, about the Turks, about the Polish. You hear them complain about all ethnicities. Why doesn't anyone complain about the Chinese? This was referring to, um, let's say, to anxieties that uh, the that the natives tend to project onto minorities. Because as we know, in every country it happens that the majority projects their collective anxieties onto minorities. It's just what happens in the world. Not that it's okay, not that we should condone it, but that's what happens, okay? So, in the context of the Netherlands, indeed, many complained about the Turks, about the Moroccans, for a brief period about the Poles, but never do you hear them complain about the Chinese collectively. Now, why is that? Now, of course, there are those that complain about the Chinese, okay, individually, don't get me wrong. And I'm not claiming that what I'm going to state in this video applies in absolute sense. There are some exceptions, of course. But in general, it comes down to this. The rulers of the Chinese communities overseas, or I'm saying the rulers of the overseas Chinese communities or Chinatowns who are pagan, they are smart. They know what they are doing. Let me explain this onto you. If you, for example, would go to some street in Brussels, some street that only has Islamic stores. There are many Moroccans living there, they speak French, and they have their own little Morocco over there in Brussels. Okay, that's it. Then go to a Chinatown. What do you see? It's kind of the same thing, but also the style of the buildings tend to be Asian-like. Or you will have Asian-like, Asian-like structures, like monuments. You'll see Chinese letters, Chinese characters. You will see here and there. You'll see insurance companies, churches. It is as if they have everything of their own in one place. Now, why am I mentioning this? The Moroccan street, which is just a street, often only has shops and stores, while the Chinatown has everything that the Chinese community in the diaspora needs. Sometimes you even have lawyers with their office over there. Will have doctors with their how to say, medical professionals with their office over there. Now, what I'm pointing out to you, the rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they know how human nature is. And with human nature, I'm referring to the human nature of fallen mankind. So how human beings operate in their fallen state. Human beings in a fallen state are narcissistic. I'm not saying that automatically we're all narcissists, no. But in our fallen state, by default, we're narcissistic. We are self-centered. We are relief seekers. That is what the pagan rulers of the Chinese diaspora are aware of. Human beings, whenever there's anxiety, they grasp for what's familiar and project the anxiety and the tension of that holding on onto outsiders. Or they do it on a selected target within their group. That's how fallen mankind is. Now, the majority of human population is in a fallen state. Unfortunately, there are even many believers who are not renewed in their mind. So, the pagan rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they know that they need to anticipate collective violence against the Chinese diaspora. So they understand that when you depend on someone, the individual you depend upon has power over you. So the individual with power over you can get away with stuff. And you most likely have to take it, because if you don't have any other options, well, you have to suck it up. For example, if you only have your job as your source of income, and you need that income to pay the rent, to buy groceries, all of that, and you don't have any other options, because to get another job you need to go to an application process, and that may take a while. You don't have multiple incomes, you only have one income. So if you only have one income and it comes from your job, then the people at the job, including your boss, have power over you. They can make and break your life. If they make things hard for you on the job, they're destroying your health. So those people can get away with a lot of stuff because you need a job. You don't have any other income. But let's say you have two other incomes, not out of work, but out of investments. Now, the job's only one of the three incomes you have. Let's say those other incomes are also high, similar to your job. Now you can quit the job anytime. So now the people at the job don't have a power over you because you don't really need that job. You get what I'm saying here? Now this fact of dependency relationships, the pagan rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they are aware of it. So they want the Chinese diaspora to remain intact from exploitation by outsiders. And at the same time, the rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they are aware of that the Chinese diaspora is relevant to mainland China, because it's the Chinese diaspora that is the economic arm of China to the rest of the world. So they know that to preserve the Chinese heritage and the power of China as an entity, they need to preserve the Chinese diaspora. So the Chinese diaspora is very important to China's economy. So the pagan rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they know they need to preserve the Chinese communities. So they establish villages in which the Chinese can find everything they need, with the purpose to make the Chinese migrants dependent upon those Chinese villages. And every such Chinese village has a warlock cabinet that governs it. And this warlock cabinet is a part of the shadow government that rules that part of the Chinese diaspora. And there is strong and stern social control upon the Chinese diaspora. Who they marry, who they sleep with, who they hang out with their friends are. Why? Because to preserve your heritage overseas, people need to spend time with one another, and they need to exclude others from that community, so the community will remain homogeneous and strong. Homogeneous communities tend to endure a lot. So that's why in Chinatowns, it is as if you enter China, and those belonging to a Chinatown or to the Chinese community around, they know everything that's going on in the Chinatown, but they never tell it to outsiders. Why? Because the economic strength of Chinatowns, economic strength of the Chinese diaspora depends upon their coherence together as a Chinese diaspora. They don't know everyone of the Chinese diaspora, because there are millions that are part of Chinese diaspora. So you won't know every one of them individually. No, you may not even stand everyone, even in your diaspora where you live. But it doesn't matter. There is a vision. You're part of the Chinese diaspora. It is your heritage, and it's your job to preserve your heritage for the next generation. So you are not in China you are, for example, in the Netherlands or in Belgium, so you do externally comply with the laws and regulations of the host country you're in. You even speak the language. You may even have contacts, social contacts of the country, but your base is the Chinese community. And through the Chinese community, you can get jobs, you can get a spouse, sex partners, you can get parties, you can get scholarships. So the Chinese diaspora is designed in such a way that the Chinese migrants won't need anything else outside of the Chinese diaspora. That's how it's designed. And look at this. This is why I'm telling you that the pagan rulers that rule the Chinese diaspora, why they're so smart. Because Chinese migrants become so dependent on the Chinese diaspora, they will contribute to the welfare of mainland China, even if they never visited mainland China. Because of that, the Chinese migrants become a tool to advance Chinese corporations, Chinese firms, and to cover up crimes committed by, I would say, Chinese criminals. You get what I'm saying here? So the pagan rulers that rule the Chinese diaspora, they played very well. And here's another thing. They know that human beings have this need for social security. Social security isn't just about financial welfare. It is about emotional safety also. So that's why the rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they make sure that there are Chinese festivals, that there is Chinese New Year celebrated every year. They make sure that there are many events related to Chinese only, to Chinese migrants only, so they will cohere with one another. They make sure also that to put pressure on Chinese migrants to force their children to perform well in schools, so that the Chinese diaspora in general is highly educated. You have many entrepreneurs, people opening snack bars, cafeterias, restaurants. Why is this? Just think about it. Let's say you have, let me take a country. Let's say you have Ireland, for example, and you have a Chinese diaspora living over there. Let's say that the Chinese diaspora is like 40,000. I'm just making up a name. It's just a fictive account, but let's say you have 40,000 Chinese living in Ireland. The overwhelming majority of native Irish people, when crisis hits, they want an outlet. That's how fallen mankind is. They want an outlet for their frustrations. Now, most likely, the target will be one of their own Irish minorities. Maybe some Irish people from the working class. But if there's this foreign element amongst them, in this case Chinese, in case of crisis, the Irish come to look at the Chinese. And now they're becoming critical of the Chinese. Now they're going to say, hold on a minute, this is our country, this is our home, Ireland. You guys are foreign, and you're living here. What do you contribute to our home? Now, if it be like this, that the Chinese community in Ireland in general is unemployed, with a lot of alcoholism, a lot of domestic violence, what do you think is going to happen? The native Irish are going to use their bad condition as an excuse to discriminate against them and to enact collective violence against them. In that case, the Chinese community over there is not safe. But if the Chinese community produces a lot of bankers, entrepreneurs, CEOs, they have many shops open throughout Ireland. They provide employment to native Irish people. When they're economically and financially relevant, what's going to happen? The Irish are going to see benefits with them being in Ireland. So because the Irish see them as beneficial and they in fact see the benefits they provide, they tend to overlook them. That doesn't mean that they are automatically accepted, but they are overlooked. And there's another thing. The Irish will also see that the Chinese take care of their own business. If they have dirty laundry, they take care of it, figuratively speaking. So if you have Chinese that are criminals, they tend to deal with their own people. So the Justice Department of Ireland is not burdened with Chinese criminals because the Chinese traditionally have their ways of dealing with them, which doesn't violate the laws of Ireland, of course. So that now you understand why I'm telling you that the rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they are smart. They make sure that there is social security for their own people. And they provoke, and some extent even compel and force their people, their own people to comply. And the people in general comply. That's why it works. That's why Chinese diaspora are strong. That's why they have so much influence. That's why when collective anxieties emerge and violence increases, the Chinese are seldom the instant target of collective rage. Now, don't get me wrong. There are places in the world now where Chinese are the direct target, the target of violence, okay? As I mentioned before early on in this video, what I'm saying here does not apply in an absolute sense. There are exceptions. But in general, I'm telling you, the Chinese diaspora worldwide is not automatically the #1 target of collective rage. Why? Because they play it well. They are smart. Now, why am I mentioning this? It is because I want you to learn from their clever attitude. They make sure that all Chinese migrant communities worldwide are autonomous from the host countries they're in. Autonomous in the sense that they don't need the assistance of the natives that surrounds them. In that manner, they can preserve their own heritage while remaining in the host country. Now let's look at another example. Let's say you have Muslim migrants and you have an Islamic community, for example, somewhere in France. Or maybe France is a good example. Let's say somewhere in Britain. Okay? Now here's the difference. China is a political entity. Yes, you have Taiwan, which is a kind of a controversial topic, but overall, China is a political entity. It's unity. Even though when you go to China itself, there are many Chinese peoples. Okay, there isn't really a thing as a Chinese ethnicity. You have many Chinese ethnicities, and those ethnicities are in the millions. Okay, you have even multiple Chinese languages, but Mandarin Chinese is the most common one. Okay, you also have Cantonese, which you speak in the south, which sounds quite different than Mandarin. Look, that's the difference. The Islamic community is far more diverse. You have Persian Muslims, you have Algerian Muslims, Moroccan Muslims, Turkish Muslims. So it's more diverse. Okay, so of course it's going to be a bit different. But I'm going to use them as a comparison now. Let's say you have an Islamic community in Britain, which is growing and growing. And this Islamic community does the same thing as the Chinese community in Britain. But they face backlash. They face much resistance. Now, are they not economically relevant? They are, because they are active economically. So they do contribute to the economic welfare of Britain. They provide jobs, they enrich the, the economic market. So just like Chinese diaspora, they're also there present, and they also are economically involved. So that's not the case. But here's the difference. The Chinese diaspora does not seek to expand itself. They just want to preserve what's theirs. While the Islamic community is more open to expansion. And because the Islamic community is open to expansion, the natives tend to feel threatened by it. Okay, let me explain. When you have a Chinese, I'm going to take a fictive country. Let's say you have a country called A. In country A, you have 1.5 million people living there. That's the population. Now you have 400 Chinese people that come over there. Those 400 Chinese people, they ask permit from the local government and they establish a small Chinese village. Later, the natives build house around so that village is incorporated in a city, but still you have this neighborhood that's Chinese. Those 400 Chinese migrants, they establish businesses, they establish real estate, so more Chinese people come over, and within 10 years, you have 8,000 Chinese people living in country A. But they all surround themselves around that Chinese neighborhood. And some move elsewhere, but they all connect to that Chinese neighborhood, to that Chinatown. So for everything they need, they will go to that Chinatown. Okay? Now let's say now you have in that country an Islamic community that emerged. Like you have 500 that come first. And they establish their own shops, their mosques, and all of that. After they beget many children. So within a generation, those 500 turned into maybe, let me say, 15,000, for example. And they also marry people from their home country. So let's say that within 20 years, the Chinese community, as I mentioned before, grew to 8,000, but the Muslim community, the Islamic community grew to 25,000 very rapidly. They expanded. And not only have they expanded, they also spread throughout the country. So you now will encounter mosques everywhere. Now what's going to happen in times of anxiety? In times of anxiety, the locals, the natives are frustrated, they want relief, and then they will see those mosques and those Islamic expressions everywhere. And because it's not native to them, they'll perceive it as foreign. And because it's foreign, they'll perceive it as not of theirs. So they will resist it. While the Chinese only have their Chinatown or Chinatowns where their heritage is expressed. You get what I'm saying here? So the rulers of the Chinese diaspora, they anticipate all of this. That's why I'm telling you they're smart. No, I'm not telling you that the pagan rulers of the Islamic community said they're not smart. They're also smart, but they're smart in another way. But in this video, I'm talking about the wisdom, the understanding of the Chinese diaspora. They are practical. They anticipate collective violence. Now, there are migrant communities that just don't do this. There are Caribbeans. That means because the majority of the Caribbean population is what they call black in the world, colored. Now, there are Caribbean blacks, they are a bit different than what we call Afro-Americans or Hebrews or whatever label you want to use. The Caribbean blacks, when they go foreign, I'm not saying this is true in the absolute sense, okay? Of course there are exceptions. But they don't do things similar to the Islamic diaspora nor the Chinese diaspora. What they do is they go foreign and they seek to be accepted by the, let me say, by the host population. They mingle themselves with the host population, seeking its acceptance. They may even betray their own countrymen, may even betray their own heritage just to be accepted by the host population. And here's the thing, eventually the host ethnicity, when it comes down to it, will cast them out. This is the world we're talking about, okay? Where people are seeking relief collectively. So, the Caribbean blacks can be accepted in some instances, but acceptance is conditional. And they'll need to perform to maintain this acceptance. So whenever there's collective anxiety, they're always in a crisis. And often, because they all want the acceptance of the host society, they tend to become enemies of one another. So now they'll begin to fight one another instead of helping each other out. That's how they make themselves vulnerable to discrimination and exploitation by the host society. You see now how unwise Caribbean black diaspora tends to be. Of course, there are exceptions, don't get me wrong, but in general, look at it. That's why in the media, they can exploit people of color through discrimination, by using white supremacy. Why? Because they can use examples of what I consider blacks oppressing blacks in societies that aren't black. By the way, I use black as a label here, okay? Just to identify the people. But when it comes to the Chinese diaspora, for example, the media has a hard time exploiting them in such a manner. Why? Because they stand strong. They are practical. Now, I used the Chinese diaspora, the Islamic diaspora, and the Caribbean black diaspora. I use all three of them in this video to teach you the following. You need to anticipate collective violence as long as you're in the world. You need to anticipate enemies. You need to anticipate violence in general. You need to anticipate bad times. Many folks just never anticipate anything. That is not wise. And you know what? That's what I really love and adore about Christ. When Christ walked the earth as a human being, okay, he was born as a human being. He was just a human form. He was born as a human being. So he walked amongst us as one of us. When he walked the earth, man, when you read the New Testament, how he acted, how his attitude was, he anticipated things. He looked beyond. I mean, whoa. Even unbelievers, let me say, even atheists, and sometimes pagans, they tend to be inspired by Christ. Even though they will not acknowledge him as Lord yet, they will eventually return. Even though they don't acknowledge him as Lord, nor as Savior, nor as God, even if they just see him as a human being with good intentions, they learn from his attitude. And when they apply it, it benefits them. So even the enemies of Christ, when they pay attention to Christ's attitude, will benefit of it if they apply his teachings. Well, of course, you can't apply it completely because they're not born again, but if they only look at Christ's example, Christ's attitude, and they copy it, it will benefit them, even though they are not for Christ. Christ, man, just look at what he did. He had 12 disciples. Okay? The other disciples left him. And he used those 12 men to grow his community. He taught them to walk in life in abundance, how to overrule violence. So that when he physically would depart to the heavens, they could remain autonomous in the world. Yes, they would be in the world, but it wouldn't be of the world. Christ did not intend for his people to be dependent on the world. Yes, we're in the world, but we are more than overcomers in this world. That means we're not bound to the provisions or regulations of this world. Yes, we comply externally with local laws and regulations, as long as those local laws and regulations aren't unjust. Meanwhile, we are active, and because we're active, we are economically relevant, we're financially prosperous, not due to hard work and all of that, but because we walk supernaturally. And besides that, we walk in our spirit abilities, and we use our spirit abilities in line with Christ to manifest wealth, health, and all that's in the kingdom of God, so that God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, when you evaluate Christ's attitude, man, you'll be overwhelmed how much wisdom and understanding that man taught us. And you have many people claiming to follow him, yet they do exactly the opposite of what he taught. Christ wanted us to be autonomous in this world, yet many seek to become incorporated in this world, yet they claim to follow Christ. Huh? Okay. Let me give an example. Now, let me give a parable now. You have, let's say that you have a Korean diaspora. Okay? Well, let's say you have a Chinese diaspora in Korea. Let's go back in time in the 19th century. Or let's say the 18th century better, 18th century. You had this Chinese diaspora in the Kingdom of Korea. And let's say that the Chinese were not liked by the Koreans, but you have this Chinese diaspora over there. Let's say there were like 3,000 Chinese people living in Korea at the time. Well, there were like let's say maybe 15 million Koreans. Those 3,000 Chinese are a very tiny minority. They can't afford having divisions amongst one another. They need to be of one accord, cooperating together. So they make sure they are autonomous. They live amongst Korean, they may even speak Korean externally, but they don't really need the Koreans, even though they are in Korea. But let's say now you have a Vietnamese diaspora of around 2,000 Vietnamese. And remember, the Korean kingdom was quite xenophobic, so they didn't really want foreigners around. But now the Vietnamese diaspora, they seek employment at Korean bosses, they seek Korean landlords, they seek to become incorporated amongst the native Koreans while they're Vietnamese. Now what's going to happen? The nature of fallen man, okay, relief seeking, holding on to what's familiar, and projecting fear onto the unknown, or projecting fear onto otherness. What's going to happen? Soon, there's going to be tensions within the Korean society, because there are tensions in every society, and the Vietnamese diaspora that has become economically dependent upon the natives, they are going to face it. Because even the Koreans that are scapegoated will be preferred above them, because they are one of them. And the Vietnamese are foreign. So now they're going to face a lot of difficulties for generations long. While the Chinese diaspora, they stand strong and firm. Now, don't you see that a lot of believers are like that Vietnamese diaspora I mentioned in this parable? They are sharing in the plagues of the world because they don't agree with Christ. If they would agree with Christ, they would be autonomous in the here and now. They would walk in freedom in the here and now. They would have life, abundance, and prosperity in here and now. Things like aging, sickness, and poverty, such things should not belong to believers. Neither should believers put up with it. Yes, these bodies of ours will expire one day, we know that. But just because our bodies are going to expire doesn't mean we have to fall apart the more we are in the body. Just like what happens to worldly people. That happens to worldly people. Because they operate in stress and in relief seeking. You shouldn't. You should become 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, even 100 or 110, 120 in the strength of your youth, because your youth is renewed, is regenerated all the time. That's how it ought to be amongst believers. But don't you know that you have people, at least they claim to follow Christ, yet they're falling apart at age 50, some even earlier? They have wrinkles here and there, due to hard work. What? Hard work? Toiling and exhausting yourself while you have the blessing of God upon you? Yes, you do make effort. You're not laying on a matters and expecting to work out. Yes, of course you're active. Okay? You should be active, not busy. You should be active, not toiling and exhausting yourself like people of the world do. But yet you have those that sing praise and hallelujah, that they have the blessing of God, yet they're toiling and exhausting themselves and destroying themselves just like people of the world, benefiting pagan businessmen who don't even work, who are not even active. So they are allowing pagan businessmen to exhaust them and exploit them, while they are left with the plagues, and the pagan businessmen are left with the luxury and the rewards. And yet those people claim to have the blessing of Christ. What? Doesn't Deuteronomy chapter 28 tell us that we should be the head and not the tail? That we should be above and exalted above all the nations of the earth? Okay, this video has become quite long, but I've taken my time to explain this on to you. It's time that believers wise up. Be at peace.